They began as nothing more than 9 exhausted knights, men without titles, without fortune, and without any realistic chance of altering history. Their original purpose was humble enough: to escort pilgrims through the lawless roads of the Holy Land, where bandits and desert raiders waited behind every dune. Yet something about this small brotherhood changed within only a few short decades. They rose from obscurity to command the respect of kings, the protection of popes, and the fear of anyone who dared oppose them. Europe watched as a silent order, one that did not preach, did not boast, and did not reveal its inner rites, accumulated wealth and influence faster than any royal dynasty. But what was the true source of their meteoric ascent? Some chroniclers believed they uncovered relics buried beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple. Others whispered that they found something even more dangerous: knowledge, not gold. A secret powerful enough to terrify monarchs and unsettle the church itself. What could 9 anonymous knights possibly have discovered in Jerusalem that made kings bow before they ever raised a sword? What emerged next was unlike anything medieval Europe had ever seen. The Knights Templar did not simply protect travelers, they began protecting their money. Pilgrims embarking for Jerusalem could deposit gold in a Templar commandery in France, and through a coded ledger system, withdraw the exact sum months later in the Holy Land. No merchant guild, no monarch, no church treasury had ever achieved such a feat. The Templars had invented something centuries before its name existed: international banking. But the brilliance of their system wasn't merely financial, it was secretive. Their ledgers used symbols instead of numbers, ciphers instead of signatures. Only the initiated could read them. Entire caravans of treasure could vanish into a network of fortified monasteries and reappear somewhere no king could tax or confiscate. Even today, some records remain unreadable. Historians admit there are routes of transfer, chains of wealth that begin on paper but never arrive at a destination. It is as if the treasure simply walked off the map. Was this financial genius or preparation for an escape the Templars knew would one day become necessary? The fall did not begin in daylight, it began in darkness. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, the King of France struck without warning. Under the cover of night, Philip the Frere's soldiers fanned across the country with sealed orders, each opened at the same hour. The command was absolute: arrest every Templar you can find, no confession, no trial, no chance to flee. Within hours, the most disciplined military order in Christendom found its knights dragged from their beds in chains. Philip accused them of blasphemy, heresy, idolatry, crimes designed not for truth but for erasure. Torture chambers became courts of confession. Men who had survived the deserts of Syria were drowned, stretched, broken on the wheel until their silence cracked. And as the pyres were stacked high across Europe, rumors spread of whispered oaths, final messages spoken not in fear, but in warning. The church publicly condemned them. Yet in private, something felt wrong, too coordinated, too swift, too desperate. Kings do not burn an entire order over rumors. They burn it when it possesses something they cannot control, something Philip feared he could never seize unless the knights were dead. What Philip seized were buildings, armor, and frightened captives, but not the one thing he wanted most: the treasure. By the time his soldiers stormed the Templar strongholds along the coast, the vaults were empty and the harbors eerily silent. Witnesses reported seeing a fleet of Templar ships departing La Rochelle only days before the arrests, slipping into heavy Atlantic fog and never returning. No Royal Navy pursued them. No manifest recorded their cargo. They were there, and then they were smoke on the horizon. From that moment, history fractures. The official record ends, but the sightings begin. Fishermen spoke of strange sails off Scotland. Portuguese harbor masters claimed pilgrims who never gave names. Entire convoys vanished beneath a code of secrecy that no king could break. The treasure, if it was ever mere treasure, had been spirited beyond the world of crowns and courts. And so, a final question lingers like a shadow over the fire-lit executions. Did the Templars truly perish, or did they go underground? Their gold disappeared. Their knowledge survived, and somewhere their legacy waits, not dead, only hidden. When Philip's soldiers stormed La Rochelle, they expected to find an anchored fleet laden with seized treasure. Instead, they found empty moorings in restless waters. No crates, no crews, no traces of hurried escape. Just absence, as if the harbor itself had swallowed the ship's whole. The royal inventory lists, cross-checked and sealed by the crown, insisted that at least 18 vessels were stationed there only a week earlier. But when the king demanded the cargo logs, not a single one could be produced. It was as if the Templars had erased their own footprints before anyone realized they were being hunted. In the months that followed, rumors drifted along the coastline like ghost stories told in salt air. Fishermen swore they saw white-sailed ships bearing the Red Cross far to the north, slipping past headlands under starlight. A Portuguese chronicler even wrote of foreign pilgrims who refused harbor, accepting only water before vanishing again into the mist. None of them asked for sanctuary. None of them made port. They were not running. They were on course. If the treasure was aboard those ships, then somewhere beyond the reach of kings, the Templars had already chosen their destination. If the Templars were fleeing Europe, Scotland was the one kingdom where they could vanish without fear of extradition, because Scotland at the time wasn't recognized by Rome at all. Robert the Bruce had been excommunicated after killing a rival before the altar of a church, and in the eyes of the Vatican, he was a king without a crown, a monarch without God's blessing. That made him dangerous and useful. When the Templar Order was dissolved, Scotland became the one realm where Rome's arrest warrants had no power. Chroniclers hint, carefully, indirectly, as if afraid even centuries later, that the exiled knights found more than just shelter there. They found allies. Some legends claim they fought alongside Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn, appearing like phantom cavalry to turn the tide against the English before disappearing again into the fog. But the most unsettling evidence is not written. It is carved in stone. In remote Scottish chapels dating to the early 14th century, there are depictions of ships with distinctive Templar sails, squared masts, narrow pennants, and the unmistakable Red Cross. These carvings should not exist. They appear after the order was supposedly destroyed, and in a nation where no official Templar survivors were ever recorded. So the question becomes unavoidable. Why do churches built decades after their extinction show Templar ships arriving from the sea, as if the order had simply relocated? The deeper historians dig, the stranger the trail becomes, because centuries before Columbus ever set sail, a handful of medieval maps already depict land masses across the Western Ocean. Land masses placed too accurately to be myth, yet too early to be discovery. The Piri Reis map, the Dulcet Portolan charts, even fragments found in Catalan archives hint at coastlines that should have been unknown to European cartographers. And yet, Someone had charted them. Official history calls these shapes artistic speculation. But speculation does not yield measurable latitude. Speculation does not show capes, river mouths, and proportions close to modern geography, and speculation certainly does not appear in manuscripts authored by men who had never left the Mediterranean. So, where did these map makers get their data? Some historians believe the answer lies with a vanished intelligence network, one with global reach long before any Christian kingdom possessed it. A network like the Templars, whose ships, unlike royal fleets, were not trading fleets, but courier fleets, couriers of gold, couriers of secrets. If the Templars fled with their treasure, did they flee towards something already known? Did they carry knowledge of another continent, a safe harbor beyond both church and crown? Because if the maps are real, even partially, then the Templars didn't disappear into exile, they disappeared into distance. Long after the Templars vanished from the legal record, their architecture refused to go silent. In stone, not parchment, their language survived. Medieval cathedrals and commanderies aligned with uncanny precision to astronomical markers, solstice sunbeams illuminating hidden alcoves, star patterns mirrored in masonry, floor plans that functioned as diagrams rather than decoration. These were not churches alone, they were coded maps. Templar builders understood something their contemporaries did not. Stone was the one medium kings could not burn. Manuscripts could be seized, confessions forced, relics destroyed, but a cathedral cannot be tortured. It endures. And hidden inside pillars, transepts, and in impossible angles are alignments that point, literally, away from Europe. Surveyors studying surviving commanderies have found that many structures are not oriented toward Jerusalem, as medieval custom required, but toward the western horizon. Some align to coordinates that have no sacred role in Christian tradition, but align eerily with Atlantic routes later used by early explorers. It is as though the Templars embedded breadcrumbs in mortar and limestone, a secret cartography disguised as worship. If this is true, then every stone they laid was not just a prayer, it was a direction. Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland is often called a church, but it behaves more like a message carved in code. Its walls are an encyclopedia of symbols, angels beside pagan green men, Hebrew letters twined with Celtic knots, and pillars etched with spiraling geometry that seems closer to engineering than devotion. But one carving eclipses all the others, one that should be historically impossible. Wrapped around the arches are floral motifs representing crops, wheat, barley, and vine leaves, all familiar to medieval builders, and yet intertwined among them is something that should not exist in 15th century Scotland: maize, or corn, a crop native to the Americas, unknown in Europe until decades after Columbus. There it is, unmistakable, the distinctive husk, the kernel rose, the botanical shape only found in the Western Hemisphere. Official academia has tried to dismiss it as coincidence, a decorative misinterpretation, but stone does not misinterpret, and the masons of Rosslyn were not amateurs. Their precision is legendary. So, how did a Scottish chapel display a New World plant before the New World was discovered? Either someone visited the Americas long before Columbus, or someone carried knowledge from those who did. Rosslyn is not a monument to Christianity alone. It is a whisper, a hint that the Templar Trail did not end in hiding, but in arrival. Across the sea in Portugal stands the Convent of Christ at Tomar, once the beating heart of the order's surviving leadership. Its centerpiece is a strange circular sanctuary modeled after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but the resemblance is not merely architectural, it is acoustical. The chamber resonates in ways no medieval blueprint should have allowed. A whisper at the altar can be heard clearly against the far wall, while footsteps vanish into silence beneath the dome. This is not coincidence, it is design. The inner pillars form a perfect geometric ring, not aligned to Rome, but to a magnetic axis pointing westward, the same directional fixation found in Templar chapels across Europe. Some modern researchers believe Tamar was not simply a place of worship, but a ritual transmission chamber, a space engineered for sound, secrecy, and coded initiation. The Portuguese crown later absorbed the remaining Templar assets under a new legal name, the Order of Christ, but the architecture never changed. It continued to house a secret that paper could not betray. And here lies the most unsettling question. If the chapel was built as a directional compass, what was it pointing toward? A sanctuary for the faithful, a vault yet unopened, or a route hidden in sound and stone, guiding initiates toward a world across the ocean? The Templars may have lost their order, but in places like Tamar, their knowledge still breathes. Long before their downfall, the Templars were accused of something far more dangerous than heresy. Knowledge, not theft, not rebellion, but possession of an understanding that threatened to rearrange the hierarchy of Christendom itself. Their deepest secret was not gold, but an idea that holiness was not bestowed downward from a throne or a papal decree, but inherited, carried through time like a living thread. Templar scholars studied sacred geometry, not as symbolism, but as a genealogy of divinity, encoded in architecture, bloodlines, and astronomical cycles. They believed that the Temple of Solomon was not merely a building, but a lineage, a continuity of sacred kingship stretching back to Jerusalem's earliest mysteries. If true, it meant the church did not create holiness, it merely tried to control it. This was the word Rome feared: legitimacy. If the Templars held proof of a holy bloodline, a living heir to an older covenant, then papal authority would collapse overnight. No cross, no crown, no throne could outrank a dynasty rooted in divine succession. That is why the order was not simply dismantled, it was hunted, not for what they claimed, but for what they might have protected. Before the Templars ever set foot in Jerusalem, whispers already circulated through European courts about an older, unbroken royal bloodline, one that did not owe its legitimacy to Rome. This was the Merovingian dynasty, the so-called long-haired kings of ancient Gaul, rumored to rule not by conquest, but by inheritance of the sacred. Chroniclers claimed their kings possessed a divine spark, a right to rule rooted not in coronation but in blood itself, a blood said to descend from the Holy Land. When the Crusades began, knights flooded east in search of relics, but the Templars curiously excavated beneath the Temple of Solomon rather than fight for possession of it. What exactly were they digging for? Weapons? Scrolls? Or a proof of connection, something that tied Jerusalem to an existing European bloodline, validating a dynasty the church could never control? If the Merovingians were rightful heirs to a sacred lineage, then Christianity, as enforced by Rome, was not the center of holiness, merely its caretaker. And if the Templars discovered solid evidence, genealogy, relics, sealed records, it would explain everything: their rise, their secrecy, and why kings and popes needed them erased. not defeated, not disproven, buried? What if the true Templar treasure was never meant to be stored in chests or guarded in vaults, because it was not object, but inheritance? A secret not cast in gold, but carried in blood. Medieval chroniclers spoke carefully of the vessel, a phrase the church later tried to reinterpret as the Holy Grail. But in the oldest sources, the Grail is not a cup. It is a lineage, a living continuation of something sacred, passed from generation to generation in human form. If the Templars protected a bloodline, their secrecy becomes suddenly logical, even inevitable. Gold can be stolen, relics can be forged, manuscripts can be burned. But a person, especially a descendant whose very existence rewired the foundations of Christian legitimacy, could only be protected through disappearance, hidden not behind walls, but behind anonymity. This reframes the entire collapse of the order. Philip and Rome were not trying to seize a fortune. They were trying to intercept an heir. If a holy lineage survived, one older than papal authority, then the church no longer stood between God and mankind. It was no longer the gatekeeper of salvation, just another branch on a much older tree. And so, the question shifts from where is the Templar treasure to something far more dangerous: who survived? For 7 centuries, the church's official stance was simple. The Templars were guilty, condemned heretics, purged for crimes against the faith. But in 2001, inside the Vatican secret archives, a historian stumbled upon a misfiled bundle of parchment sealed with the papal crest of Clement IV. It was not a condemnation, it was an absolution. The document, now known as the Chinon parchment, proved that the Pope had cleared the Templars of heresy in 1308. They had confessed under torture, he wrote, and were forgiven. They were never meant to be executed. The Church had known this all along. The parchment had not been lost, it had been buried, filed under a mislabeled archive entry, deliberately hidden from history. If the Pope exonerated them, then the destruction of the order was not a holy judgment. It was a political assassination. The Church knew. The Vatican watched, and they let Philip burn them anyway. Why? Because even the papacy feared what the Templars carried, a truth powerful enough to threaten the very structure of Christian rule. The Chinon parchment did more than clear the Knights. It revealed the first crack in the official story. Deep within the Vatican exists a subdivision of the secret archives known unofficially as the Black Vault, a collection of texts so sensitive they are neither cataloged nor acknowledged publicly. Only a handful of archivists are rumored to have clearance, and even they speak of its contents in cautious euphemism. Documents that could undo faith, not disprove it, but rewrite its foundations. Among whispered inventory lists are sealed codices describing relics the Templars allegedly recovered beneath the Temple of Solomon. Relics not of metal or bone, but of history itself. Genealogical scrolls, temple registries, and ritual lineages predating the Church's narrative of succession. If these existed, they would not merely challenge papal authority. They would bypass it. In several 17th century Jesuit commentaries, themselves partially censored, there are veiled references to evidence of continuity and divine inheritance safeguarded by warrior priests. The phrasing is unmistakable, does not speak of theology, but heredity. This is why the Vatican never reopened the case. Why absolution was sealed, not spoken. Why absolution was quiet, not public. If the Templars possessed proof that spiritual authority passed through blood, not Rome, then the Church did not suppress heresy, it suppressed competition. In 2007, the Vatican did something unprecedented. It quietly released a limited edition scholarly reproduction of the Chinon parchment, the very document proving the Templars were absolved. No press conference, no formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just a book printed in secrecy, distributed only to select historians. It was not an apology, it was a legal maneuver, a way of saying we never condemned them, without ever confronting the question that follows: then why were they destroyed? If the Templars were innocent, then their execution was not justice, it was theft. And not theft of gold, but of power. The church could admit the order's innocence only after 7 centuries had passed, when the trail was cold and the bloodline, if one existed, was safely untraceable. Reopening the archives would not vindicate the Knights, it would expose the motive. It would invite the world to ask what they protected, and why so many governments, noble houses, and clerical institutions still guard echoes of their symbols today. A public apology is dangerous. A silent one is safer. The Vatican did not clear the Templars to correct history. It did so to close the door on anyone still trying to follow it. Off the coast of Nova Scotia lies a small, otherwise unremarkable island, a place that should have been forgotten by history had it not been for a strange discovery in 1795. A teenage boy found a circular depression in the ground and began digging, expecting buried loot from some careless sailor. Instead, he uncovered the first layer of one of history's most engineered mysteries: the money pit, a shaft so deliberately constructed that it has defeated every attempt to reach its bottom for more than 2 centuries. Wooden platforms appear every 10 feet, as though someone designed the descent like a staircase of warnings. Then come the flood tunnels, not natural fissures, but architected booby traps, linking the shaft to the sea. Every time excavators get close, rushing salt water surges in and drowns the dig. 19th century engineers failed. 20th century corporations failed. Even modern drilling rigs have vanished into its depths like swallowed offerings. And yet, no treasure has ever been retrieved. Only signals of something deeper. Traces of European coconut fiber predating colonization, carved stones with cryptic symbols, and construction techniques unknown to any 15th century colonists. So who built a flooded vault on a tiny Atlantic island, centuries before maps officially showed that island existed? Some believe Oak Island isn't a treasure site, it is a decoy. Others believe it is the vault itself, and that the only ones who ever knew how to open it died protecting the secret. In the early 1990s, a team of civil engineers surveying land near Tamar, the former Templar stronghold in Portugal, stumbled upon something inexplicable: a subterranean corridor sealed with precision-cut stone blocks running directly beneath territory once controlled by the Order. Ground-penetrating radar revealed not a cave, not a crypt, but a constructed passage, perfectly linear, stretching deeper than their equipment could measure. The initial discoveries suggested multiple chambers branching off the main shaft, a complex underground network that should not have been possible with 13th century tools. Yet the masonry matched medieval Templar architecture exactly. Excitement among the researchers grew when a second scan indicated the tunnel angled westward, the same directional obsession reflected in Templar chapels across Europe. But before excavation could begin, the funding evaporated. Grants were pulled without explanation. The land was quietly purchased through a shell company. The team was informed, indirectly and without official notice, that further digging would violate heritage restrictions. Within months, the project was erased from the public registry, as though it had never existed. No collapse, no engineering hazard, just silence. Why would a discovery of purely historical value be shut down overnight, unless it wasn't history they were about to uncover, but continuity? Across centuries of attempted recoveries, from Oak Island to Tomar to secret digs in rural France, one pattern recurs. The people who get closest to the truth rarely live long enough to explain what they found. Officially, these are accidents, collapses, equipment failures, sudden illnesses, but the timing is uncanny, always just after a breakthrough, never before. Treasure hunters on Oak Island drowned inside shafts that suddenly flooded under unknown title changes. A 20th century archivist who publicly hinted at a bloodline not bullion died of a stroke 2 days before he was scheduled to testify. A Portuguese contractor involved in the Tomar tunnel survey was found dead in his car. The cause ruled electrical fault, even though the ignition was untouched. Patterns do not prove intent, but intent often hides behind patterns. More chilling still are the disappearances, researchers who resign without explanation, historians who retract their findings, engineers who refuse interviews after initial enthusiasm. No threat is ever recorded. No agency ever claims jurisdiction. The silence is the message. So the question becomes unavoidable. What are we not supposed to find? A vault, a relic, a genealogy, or something far more destabilizing, a surviving inheritance that would force the world to admit the Templars were not destroyed, only guarded ever since. Rising quietly above a Rhode Island park is a structure that should not exist. A circular stone tower with 8 supporting arches, built in a style utterly foreign to colonial New England. Official plaques call it a windmill, but windmills are not built this way. They require buttresses, not vaulted columns. They require open plains, not coastal elevation, and they certainly do not mirror Templar rotundas found in Portugal and Scotland. Yet the Newport Tower does. Its proportions match the design ratios of Tomar. Its window placements correspond to astronomical markers, specifically the winter solstice sunrise, just as Templar sanctuaries did. Carbon testing of the mortar suggests it predates English settlement, meaning it was already old when the colonists arrived. So who built it? Native tribes did not use stone vaulting. The English did not introduce round church architecture. The Vikings, though seafaring, left no such religious footprint, but the Templars, or their successor order, did construct circular sanctuaries along westward axes. Even more unsettling, the tower's orientation aligns not with Europe, but with a trajectory that traces back toward Oak Island and southward along the exact maritime arc that a surviving Templar fleet would have sailed. A colonial windmill, or a waypoint, a stone breadcrumb left by men who were not supposed to be here. If the fleet crossed the Atlantic, the Newport Tower may not be a relic, it may be the first landmark of a hidden foothold. Just inland from the New England coast, etched into a glacial rock shelf in Westford, Massachusetts, is the faint outline of a medieval knight, complete with sword, helm, and shield. Weathered by centuries of erosion, the carving was long dismissed as a natural pattern until closer study in the 20th century revealed chisel marks consistent with 14th century stoneworking. The sword, unmistakably, is not colonial or Norse. It is Templar in style, a hand-and-a-half blade identical to funerary effigies in Scotland. Even more telling is the heraldry faintly visible near the hilt, a crest tied to a real knight. Sir James Gunn, a Scottish noble linked to the Sinclair family, long rumored to have harbored surviving Templars. Local legend claims he died on American soil during a secret expedition across the Atlantic, long before Columbus was even born. If that is true, this is not a monument. It is a grave marker, a record in stone of someone who did not arrive here by accident but by mission. So, how does an impossible medieval knight end up memorialized in Massachusetts? Either the carving is a hoax, one predating the arrival of the hoaxers, or the Templar legacy did not stop at the ocean's edge. It crossed it, and the Westford Knight may be the first human footprint of their presence. The final piece of the puzzle is not architecture or legend, it is contact. Across Canada's Atlantic rim, archaeologists have recovered objects that should not exist in pre-Columbian layers. Fragments of European metallurgy, carved stones marked with cruciform engravings not used by missionaries, and burial finds hinting at cross-cultural exchange centuries before 1492. But the most unsettling evidence is biological. DNA anomalies in some First Nations bloodlines that trace not to later colonial mixing, but to a far earlier window of contact. Where the Vikings left traces of rough settlement, these finds suggest something different: integration, peaceful, symbolic, even ritual exchange. Among the Mi'kmaq, certain cross motifs resemble Templar iconography more than Catholic missionary art. They are not Roman crosses, they are patriarchal crosses, the double-barred kind used by Templar chaplains. So, how does indigenous symbology reflect a European religious order that ceased to exist in 1312? Unless it never ceased, it moved. Anthropologists, uncomfortable with the timeline, call it convergent artistic evolution. But convergent evolution does not explain metallurgy signatures, directional cairns pointing seaward, or cross variants tied to specific Templar liturgy. If the Templars brought not gold but knowledge, and sought not conquest but refuge, then America was not a mythic frontier. It was a continuation, not disappearance, reappearance. In a handful of monastic archives scattered across Europe, historians have identified a peculiar category of manuscript once dismissed as devotional astronomy. Only recently, scholars realized these diagrams were not theological illustrations at all, but mapped constellations laid over geography, as if the heavens were being used to chart something on Earth. The stars were not symbols, they were coordinates. Several of these prayer scrolls originate from Templar-associated scriptoria and share an identical peculiarity. The constellations do not align with Rome, Jerusalem, or any pilgrimage route sanctioned by the Church. They align with nautical bearings across the Western Sea. Lines drawn between star clusters mirror sailing vectors. Solstice markers match mid-Atlantic latitudes. What appears to be astronomy becomes cartography the moment one treats the sky as an overlay for the world below. This is why some researchers now call them the Cipher of Solomon, a code that uses starlight as encryption. A treasure map written so cleverly it could be carried past inquisitors without suspicion, disguised as worship. The implication is staggering. The Templars did not hide their route. They lifted it into the heavens where no king could confiscate it. If this cipher is correctly interpreted, then the path to the treasure was never buried in soil. It was written in orbiting fire. When the Templars vanished from the legal record, their symbols did not vanish with them. They migrated. The double-barred cross, the circular temple layout, the stairway symbolism, the rose and star geometry, all of it reappears centuries later inside another brotherhood of builders, the Freemasons. Officially, Freemasonry claims no genealogical link to the Templars, only philosophical inheritance. Unofficially, their earliest lodges emerge in the exact regions where surviving Templar holdings once stood. Even the rituals echo the secrecy of the older order: graded initiation, encoded architecture, knowledge transmitted orally rather than written. Masons speak of the lost word, a truth withheld until the chosen initiate is ready, the same phrasing used in preserved Templar oaths. But the most curious overlap is structural. Masonic lodges face westward, not east, the same forbidden orientation found in clandestine Templar chapels. It is a direction of departure, not arrival, of memory, not worship. When modern Freemasons are asked about this, they answer carefully, "We preserve the symbols, but not the story." Yet absence of a story is itself suspicious. Symbolism does not endure for 700 years by accident. So what were the Masons preserving, a philosophy or a trailhead? If Freemasonry is not the continuation of the Templar order, it may be its camouflage. Once researchers began comparing Templar architecture, something unsettling emerged. The same numeric ratios, the same measurements, kept appearing across sites separated by oceans and centuries. The diameter of Rosslyn's rotunda echoes the span of Tomar's inner chamber. The window angles of the Newport Tower match the solar alignment at Bannockburn. Even the spacing of monoliths near alleged landing points in Nova Scotia corresponds to a recurring triad of numbers: 3, 7, 13, all sacred within Templar numerology. Individually, these are curiosities. Collectively, they behave like coordinates. Engineers studying Oak Island's flood tunnels found their angle of entry mirrors a star-bearing route identical to the Cipher of Solomon manuscripts. The Tomar Tunnel, sealed beneath Portuguese earth, deviates westward by the same number of degrees as the Newport Tower's orientation. These are not architectural coincidences. They are navigational redundancies. Redundant systems are built for one purpose: to ensure a message survives even if a piece is destroyed. So what if the treasure was never meant to be found by digging? What if the map was never underground, but all around us? A geocode spanning continents. A message written in temples, towers, and tombs. Not X marks the spot, but X's constellation. If decoded fully, these alignments might not reveal where the Templars went, but where they intend to be found. In 1946, a French farmer digging near the old Templar fortress at Gisors claimed he struck something metallic just beneath the roots of an apple tree. Expecting a buried tool or discarded scrap, he uncovered instead a gilded chest, bound in corroded iron, a container he said was too ornate to be peasant-made, too ancient to be Napoleonic. Word spread quickly through the village, and before long, government officials appeared to secure the site. The box was confiscated, the land was sealed, and the farmer's testimony was dismissed as exaggeration. But the story should have ended there. It didn't. Months later, a municipal clerk leaked a line from an internal report describing the chest as Templar origin, ritual and category, historical risk factor, high. Newspapers caught the scent. Europe erupted in speculation, and suddenly, as if on command, the entire matter disappeared from the public record. No artifact, no follow-up excavation. Even the original confiscation file could not be located. The farmer maintained until his death that the chest was not empty, that officials gasped when they opened it. What he saw in their faces was not triumph, but fear. So what was inside the golden box of Gisors? A reliquary, a charter, or proof that the Templars never lost what the kings tried to steal? For decades, television crews and history specials have descended on Templar sites with eager narration and dramatic lighting, yet somehow every investigation stops 1 inch before the line of danger. Footage is edited to build suspense, then swerve away from real leads. Artifacts are teased, then dismissed. Testimony is recorded, then cut in final broadcast. Viewers are given mystery but never answers. This is not incompetence, it is containment. Several dig teams have quietly admitted that networks required contractual clauses, giving producers the right to withhold or redirect findings that deviated from the approved narrative, a narrative that frames the Templars as tragic monks with missing gold, not guardians of forbidden continuity. When cameras do catch something unusual, symbols beneath plaster, unregistered burial shafts, sealed doorways, the final edit reframes it as coincidence, misinterpretation, or unfinished segment, to be revisited later but never is. The public is allowed curiosity but not proximity, because proximity forces a question no network wants aired. What if we're not dealing with treasure hunters chasing a myth, but gatekeepers guarding a threat? Some documentaries don't investigate the mystery, they bury it in spectacle. The lie is not what they show, the lie is what they carefully do not. In every generation, a few researchers claim they have found definitive proof of the Templar treasure. And in every generation, those voices vanish before they can reveal it. Sometimes they resign for personal reasons. Sometimes they stop replying to colleagues. Sometimes they die suddenly, the kind of death that leaves no investigation, only a footnote. In 1984, a French archivist announced he had decoded references to a living heir within sealed Templar charters. 2 weeks later, he was reportedly relocated and never resurfaced in academia. In 1997, a Portuguese surveyor working near Tamar told a journalist off record that he had found not a vault, but a passage to someone's refuge. He retracted his statement the following month and left the country without forwarding address. The pattern is unmistakable. Those who claim to find gold are mocked. Those who claim to find lineage are erased. The silence is not random, it is selective. And the farther a discovery shifts from treasure to identity, the faster that silence closes in. No lawsuits, no counter-arguments, no scholarly rebuttals, just quiet. The same power that ended the Templars' public existence appears to be protecting their private one. If the hoard is not material but genealogical, a living continuity, then whistleblowers are not revealing a location. They are threatening a bloodline. For centuries, we have searched for chests, vaults, reliquaries, gold. But the oldest surviving Templar writings hint at something altogether different. The treasure was not meant to be spent. It was meant to be carried. Not a fortune, but a force. Illumination. In manuscripts copied from lost originals, the Knights describe the light kept veiled, a knowledge transmitted only to the worthy, guarded not by walls but by initiation. This reframes the entire story. The Templars were not destroyed because they were wealthy, they were destroyed because they were sovereign. Wealth can be taxed, armies can be defeated, but illumination, the idea that spiritual authority does not require permission, is revolution, and revolution terrifies thrones. The treasure, then, was never a physical hoard. It was continuity of gnosis, a through line of sacred inheritance that bypassed priest and king alike. To those who cling to earthly power, such a truth is more dangerous than any arsenal. A relic can change a church. A bloodline can change a throne, but illumination, knowledge that sovereignty is carried within, can change a civilization. This is why the church could burn their bodies, but not their memory. You can martyr a man, you cannot martyr a revelation. The Templars may have vanished from history, but the idea they protected never left it. Even if the Templars disappeared as an order, their symbols did not disappear with them. They embedded themselves into the world that survived them. The double-barred cross appears not only in medieval shrines, but on modern currency, national seals, and coats of arms. Cathedrals built long after their dissolution still echo their geometry. Rose windows that function as star charts, archways with encoded ratios, floor plans that point westward instead of east. These are not accidents of style, they are fingerprints. Their legacy traveled farther than architecture, in law, in banking, in fraternal societies, even in digital cryptography. We find Templar logic, decentralization, secrecy through code rather than concealment, and the belief that knowledge belongs first to those who guard it, not those who claim to license it. The knightly cross became the passport stamp of sovereignty, a reminder that legitimacy can survive exile. And in the strangest twist of all, the modern world now circulates Templar thought at scale, not through parchment, but through networks. What once required a sealed chapel now requires only a signal. The physical order died, the idea metastasized. When a symbol survives its makers, it stops being decoration. It becomes continuity. For 700 years, kings, scholars, explorers, monarchs, secret societies, and treasure hunters have searched for the Templars' hoard, digging in soil, tunneling through stone, interrogating archives as though the answer were a fixed location on a map. But maybe the greatest misdirection of all is that we kept looking downward when the Templars taught through architecture, orientation, astronomy to look upward. Gold can be hidden, people can be erased, but mystery endures precisely because it chooses its keeper. If the treasure were merely metal, the story would have ended long ago with a shovel. But the trail instead leads to something far more dangerous than wealth: continuity. A lineage of knowing that outlived the attempt to annihilate it. A secret that remains secret not because it is lost, but because it is guarded. Not to protect it from the world, but to protect the world from what it would become if unready. And so the final question is not where the treasure is, but why it still remains hidden. What if its purpose is not to be found, but to be recognized? Because perhaps the treasure isn't lost. It's waiting for the right eyes to see it.